It's time to talk some Raptors president speculation. Will Bobby be out if he doesn't become the guy? Hey, what about the bench optimism? Or are we feeling a little down? That's up next on today's Locked On Raptors.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It's your favorite part of the day. Thanks for making Locked On Raptors your first listen every day. I'm Vivek Jacob. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors for 8 seasons across several outlets. You can follow Locked On Raptors on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube. And be sure to check out the Locked On Raptors Discord, where you can talk all things basketball, but especially the Raptors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. It is Wednesday, July the 23rd. I am joined by a man you're used to seeing plenty of on TV, on TSN. You can read his work over at tsn.ca. He's always on top of the inner workings of the Raptors. It's Josh Lewenberg. How are you doing, buddy?
Good, man. What's going on?
Nothing much. Just, making that transition from summer league talk to just speculating and, a whole lot of slop for the rest of the summer, I guess. And that's why I thought you'd be the perfect man to bring on and talk about what's going on with the team right now. Obviously, you were in Vegas and got to know some of the newer Raptors and got to chat with, I'm sure some of the execs that were over there. And so let's start there. You reported recently that the CAA has submitted a list of candidates that they have, figured out would be the best possible options for the Raptors, and the MLSE is now in the process of vetting them. When I go back to Keith Pelly's presser, he mentioned a businessman several times over the course of that presser. As the time has gone on, do you get the feel that MLSE is more inclined to pick someone with more of a business acumen than a basketball guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally you find the balance there somewhere where you have somebody that comes with experience in business and in basketball. Threading the needle is pretty tough, right? Like you're probably going to lean to one side or the other. And I think what you want to do if this guy is truly this person that they hire to be the president is truly going to be overseeing basketball operations is there needs to be some semblance of basketball experience there. But there is a pretty big business element to the job as well, as we saw over the years with Masai Ujiri. I mean, it's tough because as Keith Pelly pointed out, rightly so in the press conference, is I think this was in response to the question of why replace the president with the Raptors and not replace the president with the Leafs, is there's no blueprint as to how this is supposed to look from a front office structure standpoint. I think I did the math. It was almost half the league right now. I think 14 of the 30 teams are currently operating without a dedicated team president. Now, again, it looks different with every organization. Some teams have a president / general manager. I mean, the reigning champions have a executive vice president and general manager in Sam Presti, who essentially is operating as the president, but he doesn't have the title and is reporting directly to ownership. So it looks different no matter what. And ultimately, the actual job description of whoever they hire is going to depend not only on what the title is, it sounds like it's going to be president, but ultimately what the structure is. Is Bobby Webster, if it's not Bobby Webster, if it's an external candidate, is Bobby Webster reporting directly to that person? And is Bobby Webster or whoever the general manager is in charge of basketball operations? Or is the president in charge of basketball operations? I do remember him saying something in the press conference we don't need him to sell tickets. We have people in charge of that. So, yeah, I mean, they've got a lot of things to figure out. In addition, obviously, to who this person is that gets the job is what is even the job? What does it look like? What's the job description?
Yeah, and another thing that he mentioned was, hey, if it takes 2 to 3 weeks to figure out the right person, that's fine. If it takes 2 to 3 months, that's fine too. Do you get any sense that this is something that they want to get done sooner rather than later? And I mean, obviously, worst case, you would expect it to be in place before training camp, but do you get the sense that over the next month we should have a new Raptors president?
I don't know about in the next month, but like it has been moving relatively quickly considering they already have a list of recommended names. They're well into the process of vetting those names. I'd imagine interviews will be starting up if they haven't already in the next little bit, and they'll start to take a look at um, a really thorough look at some candidates here and get to know people. Yeah, I think sooner rather than later is probably their preference, and certainly well before we found out today. Training camp starts end of September, beginning of October in Calgary, and then they go to Vancouver. And yeah, like to not have somebody in place at that point would be a disaster based on what I saw during my time around the team in Vegas, as I wrote about, is like this is a team that is very much in limbo right now. This is a very, very weird situation where um, the only person that is missing, the elephant in the room, is the one person who isn't in the room in Masai Ujiri, but literally everybody else that was employed with this organization is still employed, at least for now. Like you look at the website and they've got, I think it's 80 people listed on their staff. And outside of the guy at the top, who's still on that list, by the way, still on the website, outside of the guy at the top, everyone else is still employed. Everyone else was in Vegas, probably to, in part, show face and prove their worth, and obviously to do what everyone else is doing, myself included, is kind of suss out what comes next. So it's a bizarre situation where, like, I would say in this very competitive industry of professional sports, like nobody can really ever feel safe. Nobody's job secure. Nobody really has long-term job security. You're only as good as what you've done lately, and everyone is performing for their job, playing for their job, whatever it is, to some degree. But it's super rare to have a situation where everybody feels it so intensely. Everybody is looking over their shoulder. Nobody feels safe from top to bottom. There are a lot of whispers, a lot of nervous energy, and that's not going anywhere until they hire a president. And I asked a question to Keith Pelly in the press conference, like, is this job attractive to external candidates, considering there's an entire leadership team that is still in place here that's recently been extended? And he said, like, yeah, and I agree, like, it's still an NBA president's job. It's always going to be attractive to some degree. But if the stipulation is like, oh, well, you can't bring in your own people, maybe not as much. But let's put it this way, I would be very surprised if that was the stipulation. The extensions that Bobby and his leadership team were given, short-term extensions. I believe they added a year on to their deals.
Yeah.
They're not making Masai money, I can tell you that. So if the plan is eventually to pivot, if they bring in someone new, that person wants to bring in their own people, wouldn't be hard to do. So all of that is to say that, like, yeah, this is, I described it like this in a story that I wrote like a few weeks ago, is it kind of feels like a house of cards where right now everything is still together. It's still business as usual. Everything is still operating the way that for the most part it always has. But you do get the sense that, like, if something happens here to kind of shake up the foundation, that it could topple over pretty quickly here. They're in a pretty precarious situation.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and it's not just the way the contracts up with the executives; it's the way the contracts line up with with the players too.
Yeah.
And we'll get into more of that and the Bobby Webster of it all coming up next. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're out on the baseball field, under the lights, golf on the green, or high stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Whether I'm placing a same game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 back in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we are back here with TSN's Josh Lewenberg talking all things front office at the moment. Uh, Josh, when I look at, obviously the MLSE going through this process of vetting candidates, and Pelly has said that he will consider Bobby Webster as a candidate. If I'm Bobby, with everything that I've accomplished with the Raptors so far, I'll believe not only that I'm good enough, that if I don't get the opportunity here, someone else will see me as their president. And is there a real risk that if Bobby Webster does not become the president, that he will be on his way out by 26, 27?
I just don't think that it's a sustainable situation to have him reporting to somebody who ultimately gets the job that, to your point, he wants and he almost certainly feels like he's earned and deserves. Um, and it also depends who that person is. Like to go back to our previous conversation in terms of like, and I don't know what the list looks like that CAA submitted to MLSE, and I'm not sure that anyone does. Like names are really hard to come by right now, but based on what I've been hearing, maybe an educated guess that I have is like, I wouldn't be surprised if the candidate that ends up emerging from this process is somebody with experience as a player agent, either currently or formerly. Um, it's a popular trend around the league now. We're seeing it more and more. Obviously, Rob Pelinka with the Lakers and Leon Rose with the Knicks are two of the big names that
Yeah.
come up, and like it's a copycat league. Teams are doing it. They've had success doing it. Um, I get the sense people that I've talked to around the league have gotten the sense that MLSE is intrigued by going that route. And look, like I said, there are a lot of benefits to it. I think that perspective, somebody that has worked closely with players, is one that, well, first of all, this Raptors front office, while they have a lot of different types of skill sets and a lot of different types of backgrounds, that's one thing that they don't really have. But what the mold of the player agent turn executive generally doesn't have is relevant front office experience. At least maybe some of them have a little bit of it. I know some former agents have been working in front offices as like consultants or whatever, so there is some experience there, but certainly not to the level like Bobby Webster, who's still a very young man, by the way, and still looks it. But he spent half of his life, literally half of his 40 plus years in the NBA, and has spent the last decade plus working as one of the top lieutenants and then eventually the top lieutenant to Masai Ujiri in Toronto. So if you are Bobby and you're asked to report to somebody who gets your job, who might have maybe no relevant front office experience, that's probably not a great situation. And then again, on the other side of it is like the person that's coming in might not want that situation either. So like maybe that's something that I would think that MLSC, if they're not naive, like they've probably got a realistic idea that if they go in a different direction and hire an external candidate, that they're essentially saying goodbye to Bobby Webster and to the rest of this front office team,
Yeah.
right?
And
Too, like
Tolzman, and yeah.
right. Now, Bobby, like he is very well respected, well regarded around the league, and highly sought after. Like the Raptors, less so over the last few years, at least publicly. But remember, there were years, certainly after around the championship, given the Raptors' success, where like every week it seemed like there was a report that like, oh, this team is trying to poach this person and this team is trying, and the Raptors have said no, you can't interview this person. But yeah, I mean, there have been a number of teams that have picked up the phone and come calling about Bobby over the last few years. I remember Chicago was very interested before hiring another former Raptor
Mark
exec in
Eversley.
Mark Eversley. So look, I don't know that there is another president's job out there waiting for him right now, but there are certainly other general manager opportunities that would present themselves where probably he would have more autonomy to go somewhere and to be the primary basketball decision maker, something that probably wouldn't be afforded to him if he's to stay here reporting to the new primary basketball decision maker. Um, if you've read my latest piece, you've probably noticed that I am a big believer in Bobby Webster. I am. I think
Yeah.
he's smart. extremely capable. I think he's experienced. I think he has a great eye for talent. I don't think he's Masai Ujiri, and I don't know that that's a bad thing. Like, certainly he doesn't command the room in the same type of way. He doesn't have the same larger than life personality. But I don't think the Raptors are at a place anymore where they need a front facing executive, where they need the face of the organization to be an executive. Ideally, like you have a player in that role as face of the franchise. They needed that 10 years ago when Masai came in. This organization was hurting. They were in a place where they needed somebody to stand up there and command the room and sell everybody on the organization in front of the camera, behind closed doors. They needed it. I don't know that they need it anymore. Um, I think Bobby is a type of guy that he's a chameleon. Like he can, and I don't need to tell you this. You've seen it over the years. He can dress down and kind of chum it up with players and team staff and media and fans, but and then he can suit up and he looks the part
Yeah.
there too. Um, I think that Masai and his like, look, Masai is a celebrity. Masai
Yeah.
it's not just the personality that's larger than life. He has become larger than life in a lot of ways. And I think, like, I mean, first of all, it's kind of harder to relate to people when you are considered at that like tier of celebrity, that level of celebrity. Bobby isn't that type of guy. He's as down to earth, I think, as you can get in this industry at that position. But I also just think, like, there are teams, there are executives, and we know about some of them. Like some of it is out there in stories that you've read over the years, reports that we've read over the years, and then some of it I've heard a lot of behind the scenes as well. Like there are teams, there are executives that were intimidated by Masai, that did not want to deal with Masai, that would hang up the phone. I can't imagine there are too many people around the league that are like, we're not dealing with Bobby Webster. So I do think there are some benefits there. I do think that he is qualified, that he has earned the opportunity to at least see what a Bobby Webster team looks like. That's the thing, is like none of us know what a Bobby Webster team would look like. I think the
Yeah.
assumption here from a lot of people is that, oh, he's just Masai 2.0, a Masai disciple. But like, just
No,
because
you
two people,
pointed out,
yeah,
right? Like the going from Dwayne Casey to Nick Nurse was night and day, and so
yeah.
that's proof enough that
Unless you
each
run your
person is
own
their own man.
company, we all have bosses, right? Like,
Yeah.
just because you agree with some of the things your bosses do, it doesn't, like, if you were running the company, doesn't mean that you would make those same decisions. So I think that's silly,
Yeah.
and a misconception is like, oh, he's just going to be the same guy, do the same things. The only question that I have with Bobby is whether I said he could relate to a lot of different people. Can he step into the MLSC boardroom and sell the suits on a trade, on a player, on going into the tax, on himself, because he's going to need to do that in order to get the job? And I'm not saying that he can't do that because I haven't seen it, but it's a little bit harder to envision just because he's not Masai, right? Like Masai could do
Yeah.
that. That was
Yeah.
Masai's one of Masai's greatest arenas. He would go in there and have them eating out of the palm of his hands. Bobby's going to need to prove that. And one of the things that you asked about the timeline for filling the president position, and yeah, I do get the sense they'd rather have it filled sooner rather than later. I suggested this in the story that I wrote recently, is like, what's the rush? Why do this at all? I mean, I think a lot of people were surprised when MLSE announced like they had fired Masai and then they planned on replacing Masai, because
Hmm.
like they weren't doing that with the Leafs. They didn't do that with TFC. I don't think anyone would have questioned if they just kind of stayed consistent, like, okay, well, we're not. They could have just said, like, we're always in the market for talented people. We're always looking, but for now, status quo, Bobby's in charge. Give him a year as general manager. You don't have if you're not sure that he's ready for the president gig, you don't want to commit to him. Don't. But allow him to run basketball operations from the general manager role. See how it goes, see how the team looks. Allow him to sink or swim, and that way if it works, you could elevate him and everybody else next summer. If it doesn't work, then you can justify bringing in somebody new in a way that maybe you can't right now. Like if they do that, especially if they bring, I don't, if they bring in somebody without a ton of front office experience, how's that going to play in this market? Is it going to be
Yeah.
well received? especially when there is a candidate that I think a lot of people are not rooting for, like at least intrigued by. Like, don't you want to see what a Bobby Webster team looks like?
Yeah, at the very least, he would come with a certain level of trust.
Yeah.
And I think the other plus factor and something that MLSE should be considering with Bobby here for me is if there was ever a salary cap era for Bobby,
Yeah.
this is it. You want a guy who has been working at the head office, understands the cap structure, would have dug into every single detail of the second apron and will understand the ramifications of each transaction. And I think that's got to be one of his biggest plus points in this whole search.
And yet the irony is like I fear that might hurt him in this process. I fear like he may have been typecast as like, oh, he's the accountant.
Right.
He's the brains behind the operation. He's like the second in command, the guy that's whispering in the ear of the president is like, oh well, spend this, don't spend that. Here's how we fit all of this into like is that the guy that is running the show? And I don't see why it can't be or why it shouldn't be. But again, my fear is that they'll look at him and say, well, he's just the smart guy, that the bean counter or whatever.
Right.
Whereas I think he has proven over the years, especially as his roles expanded over the last few years, that he is more than that and that he can do more than that.
Yeah. Just to quickly wrap up on the Bobby thoughts, or just the front office in general right now as MLSE searches for a president. Is it safe to say that all transactions are on hold until a president is found? Because we've seen the RJ rumors, the quickly rumors, potentially, in terms of managing the cap, maybe there's something that involves Ochai. Is it safe to say that until a president is found, that all that stuff is on hold?
It's not safe to say anything in this crazy league. The second we say it is the second the opposite happens. But yeah, I mean, especially given you mentioned earlier, like we passed summer league. Obviously, we passed the draft, start of free agency. We passed summer league. We're heading into that like August period where it's generally very, very quiet in the NBA. It's not to say that nothing can happen, but very rarely does something happen. It certainly looks more and more like this Raptors roster is set. And yeah, regardless of where they are in the I think they're pretty close to the tax, whether they're a little over, a little under. We, tax doesn't get charged until game 82. They have some time here to see how this looks, figure it out mid-season. There was certainly a lot of noise at one point, not only in regards to like RJ and selling, but also the other players that were out there and potentially buying. But I think if you look at the timeline there too, my sense of it is Masai knew for a little bit anyway that things were likely headed in this direction, that this was an inevitability or at least a probability. I'm not sure that he knew exactly when it was going to happen, but he knew that it probably was going to happen. And that's why, if you're Masai, like, might not have been a bad time to be swinging for the fences. And when we heard all of that smoke of like, oh, maybe Giannis, maybe Kevin Durant, maybe this, maybe that, like, there was a time there pre-Masai firing where the Raptors were certainly very, very active. And I think Masai's situation had a lot to do with that. And then to your point, I think like the Raptors' current front office situation probably is indicative of the fact that things are going to be quiet here until training camp opens in Calgary.
And we will preview a little bit of that training camp and looking back on what we saw here at Summer League. And we're back here with TSN's Josh Lewenberg, and we've done a lot of front office talk. You were in Vegas, so let's talk about the on-court product for a little bit. And when I think of the Raptors bench, specifically the guys who we saw at Summer League, because obviously Grady, Ochai, Sandro, they're going to figure in. But in terms of the guys we saw, I think the three most important players that will figure into the rotation are likely Jamal Shed, Jacoby Walter, Colin Murray-Boyles. And when I look at how things played out, I think Jamal Shed is maybe being handed the keys a year earlier than what would be ideal. but we're going to see how he goes. I think the bonus is that you've got five very good starters. And so you should be able to stagger the lineups in a way that gives him and Jacoby Walter the support that they need. You know, we saw some ugly moments for the half court offense. We can be, I think, very encouraged by what we saw from them defensively. But I think if they can get the right support from a couple of the starters along with them, I think there's a lot of positives to take away from what they showed at Summer League.
For sure. And like I think probably we should start with the summer league caveat of like you always have to take this stuff with a grain of salt. I think like what the old saying is, you can't tell who can play at summer league, but it does show who can't play. And even that, I mean, last year at summer league, the Raptors' worst player was Ochai Agbaji. Like,
Right.
considering he was a third year player in summer league too, he was terrible.
Yeah.
It was hard to watch.
Yeah.
And then he goes into the season and almost immediately just breaks through. 3-point shooting, much better. Defense, much better. Was one of the bright spots for the Raptors last year. So even that, I'm not sure it holds up the like, you can tell who can't play. It really is like, it really is a grain of salt situation. But with all of that said, like, if you're the Raptors, and especially this year where more than ever, I think you're emphasizing evaluation and development at this time of the year because they had so many regular roster players playing in Vegas, way more than we're used to seeing from any team. Um, you're looking to see progress from those players. And I think we saw it. Like, I mean, they all had flashes at various points of what they can become. None of them were consistent, but I'm not worried about that. Like that, in my experience, is that's the last thing to come for young developing players is to do it consistently. But I like that for each of those guys, we saw like Jacoby put on the strength that he needed to put on. And it's like, it's one thing to say that you've gained 12 pounds of muscle, but like, what are you going to do with it? And he showed us, like, especially in a couple of those games where he really popped, he was playing more aggressively, finishing through contact, which is something he really struggled with last year. He mentioned, I was talking to him last week, and he's like, I had no problem getting to the rim, and he didn't. Like, he did a good job of that. It's finishing once he got there. I think he was 47% inside of 5 feet last year, which was dead last on the team of guys that had attempted 120 shots from that range. Whereas he was really physical, embracing contact this year. I mean, Ulrich Shamshay, where do you even start with him? A guy that's like night and day from the player that he was in Vegas 12 months ago. Um,
Yeah.
Mobo looked great. Said, I mean, predictably looked great. And to your point, like, yeah, it's always you're always going to be a bit nervous when you have a second year guy running either unit, first or second. But
Hmm.
I think, and talking to people around the Raptors, one of the things that everyone mentioned is like the blessing in disguise last year. I mean, obviously, the blessing in disguise from a rebuilding, tanking year should have been a great first round pick. It wasn't. But the other benefit is these guys have a lot of NBA experience, a lot more than most second year players have. It was like trial by fire, especially in the second half of the season. So, in a lot of ways, Jamal Shed feels like certainly more mature and older than you would expect from a sophomore. And part of that is just like
Yeah,
his
for sure.
mentality and the way that he is in general. Um, so yeah, I mean, I feel pretty good about where this Raptors team is coming out of summer league. Is kind of like the midsummer checkpoint and taking a look at some of these guys. And the one guy that I didn't mention is Colin Murray Boyles, who, I mean, he had that one game against Golden State where he really popped, and that was a snapshot right there of why the Raptors fell in love with him. And if you want to zoom in even further, there was that 30-second stretch where it's like layup, steal, dunk, offensive rebound, another bucket. And like that's the type of guy that he is right now. Is like defense into offense. At some point you hope that he expands his offensive game a little bit more, but I was talking to him for a story that I'm writing, and I was asking him a lot about defense. The piece is going to be centered primarily around defense. And I think I said something along the lines of like do you want to be known for your defense? And he's like, not entirely for my defense, like not just as a defensive player. And he was explaining that like when you come into the NBA, you need to find a niche. You need to find your role. And the best way to do that is to figure out one thing that you're really good at, fully embrace it, and eventually build around that. And for him, that's defense. So I love that. Like and that's kind of what we saw in summer league too, where he's got that mindset. He plays really hard defensively. I think a lot of it is stuff that's just like innate, inherent, that can't be taught, just like your natural instincts in the way that he gets his hands on loose balls and breaks up passing lanes and all that stuff. And obviously
His
finds way
anticipation level is amazing. Like,
for sure. For sure. And if he can continue to, and I think to your point, like that's enough right now to get his foot in the door to earn some minutes with that second unit. And if he can continue building on that, like that's kind of what I saw, or what I thought of the pick initially is like I don't know about the ceiling, and the ceiling ultimately is going to be determined, I think, by what he does offensively, how he
mhm.
expands his game. But that mindset of like defense is my foundation, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it really well, and play it really hard. That to me gives him a pretty high floor in the NBA.
Yeah, yeah. I think defense, there was a lot to like. I think he will come into the league ready to defend threes and fours, some twos. I don't think he's quite ready for fives. I don't think the Isaac Jones audition went too well, and that's someone who you'd consider as an undersized five. So I wouldn't put that on his plate yet. I wouldn't put obviously there's going to be situations where he gets switched on to point guards and it'll just happen, but I don't think that's something that you want to actively pursue with him at this point in time. Uh, Quickly, I know you spent some time with Jacoby Walter as well. I'm curious how you see that battle potentially between Jacoby Walter, Grady Dick, and maybe even Ochai Abaji.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. It's a good problem to have if you're Darko Rayakovic. I mean, at that position, but really any position now that this is looking like a much deeper team. I think first of all for Darko, like one skill that he's going to need to have here that we just really haven't seen over the last couple of years, because for the most part it's been like whoever he has available is who he has to play. Now he's got options, and I think he's got to keep an open mind. He's got to be flexible here in a way that, and I'll use an example. It was the bench mob year, I believe. It was Pascal Siakam's second year. And Pascal, as we know, he was thrust into a starting role that he wasn't ready for year one because Sullinger got hurt. He started for a while, played for a while, went to the G League in the second half of the year, barely played once they got Serge Ibaka. That second year, the plan was not for him to be in the rotation at all. He was
Yeah.
going to be like the 11th man or something like that. And then somebody got hurt at the beginning of the year. I think it was JV. And ultimately, Pascal was kind of thrust into spot minutes. And I remember even the opponent, it was a game against Golden State very early in the year. He had a huge game. And all of a sudden, Casey was like, well, like, I can't sit this guy back down. Like he's earned these minutes, even if this wasn't the plan. So that's the thing, is like they're gonna go into the year, they're gonna have an idea of what the rotation is gonna look like, what the plan is, specifically at that 2-3 position that you mentioned. They have to be open-minded with it. And it might be in training camp where they decide they have to pivot. It might be a couple games into the season, but if somebody pops, like, I mean, looking at the roster right now, sorry, I know I'm like going um to a different position here,
No,
but
no, go ahead.
like Mobo doesn't look like he's going to be in the rotation right now, especially
Yeah.
because he's a little redundant with what CMB brings to the table. But he was really impressive in summer league. I mean, that the one game that I was there for, the opener against Chicago, I would argue that Mobo was the best player on the floor. If he gets an opportunity in camp or at the beginning of the season and he pops, then like you've got to be able to go with the flow in that scenario. Maybe that
Yeah.
means that it's somebody like, and I'll go back to your example. Like maybe it's Jacoby that pops in training camp, and maybe that means somebody like Grady Dick, who was a lottery pick a couple of years ago and was starting games, started every game that he played, I believe, last year. maybe that means that he falls out of the rotation, and they've got to be okay with that. They can't look at it and say, well, this is where we drafted the guy, or this is how much money we have invested in the guy. Um, Ultimately, like, internal competition, I think, is a good thing. It's something that the Raptors haven't had in a long time. Um, and I think it brings out the best in guys, or it doesn't. But that's why you have to allow, I think, guys here to earn their opportunities, earn their minutes. And for a team that's very clearly prioritizing defense, that was their identity last year towards the end of the year. That was their identity in summer league, where, by the way, a lot of guys here, you mentioned a bunch of them, are here building chemistry and working on things, especially on the defensive end. Grady, like, third-year players don't have to play. I mentioned Ochai did it last year. I'm sure it was a conversation that was had. I don't know enough about the situation to say whether it was the team that didn't want him to play or whether he didn't think that he needed to play. I know that some people would have liked to see him out there. I think given where he's at, where the team is at, the depth at that position, maybe it would have been beneficial to him. But I'll say this, and I've already made this maybe not so bold prediction, is if he doesn't get at least a little bit better defensively, enough to be able to hold his own and get a lot better at the thing that he's supposed to be really good at, because he's never going to be a great defender.
Yep.
But that's fine if he's shooting 40% from three.
Yep.
To this point in his career, he's been a below average 3-point shooter, well below what the expectations were when they drafted him. He's still young. I still have optimism that he can become that type of player. But if he's not going to defend at a very high level, he's going to need to shoot at a very high level in order to stay at the floor. And the team could use that. They could use his shooting. But if he doesn't do either or both of those things, Jacoby Walter is lurking. Ochai Agbaji, coming off of a career year, is lurking. And I'm really, really encouraged by what I've seen from Jacoby. I liked him a lot in small samples last year. It was a weird rookie year with all the injuries and the start and the stop. But I think he showed enough then. I think he's done exactly what he needs to do, including putting on that muscle and getting stronger now. I don't think like he's an elite defender right now either, but he's young and he plays really hard on that end. I see the potential there. And he's shot the ball really well in the second half of last year. So he's a type of player that fits how they want to play and what they want to do. I wouldn't be shocked at all if by midseason he has usurped Grady on the depth chart and maybe Ochai too.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Listeners of the show know that I've been super high on Jacoby. I've even speculated that, if certain things play out at the trade deadline, he could potentially even be the starting shooting guard by the end of the season. I like that you mentioned, iron sharpens iron, and it's a long time since the Raptors have had that. I think that's going to be the biggest positive that emerges out of this shooting guard, small forward battle. You mentioned the Pascal example. Another one I'll throw out there is, OG's rookie season when Norm had the starting gig, and then he got injured, and then OG Anunoby gets the opportunity to defend James Harden in Houston and just looks incredible. And it's like, okay, you can't go away from this. And that's it. Norm's back to the bench, and that was the end.
The adage is like you shouldn't ever like lose your job because of injury, but like why not? It's a brutal and competitive business, but that's the way that it is. And at the end of the day, it's a results-driven business. All that matters at the end of the day is winning. And if there is another guy out there that is willing and ready to take advantage of the opportunity when it comes up, then like ride the hot hand. And I mean, the Raps can't be afraid to do that, regardless of who the guy is, the name value, the contract, whatever it is.
Josh, thanks so much for joining me. I really enjoyed this. If you want to carry on our discussion, head on over to the Locked On Raptors Discord. The link is in the description. Make sure, again, that you head on over to tsn.ca to read all of Josh's great work. I don't know if you want to have people follow you on Instagram, but you can go do that as well.
Yes, please.
Beyond that, thank you for making Locked On Raptors your first listen today. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast, where there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.